We have Heath Pearce with us today. Thanks so much for being on the soccer ladder.
Thanks for having me.
This is exciting. You have quite the background.
Is that true? I don't know if that's true. Depends what you compare it to.
That's true. So, you had 5 seasons with MLS, is that correct?
Mhm. That is correct.
5 years with German, how do you say it?
Bundesliga?
Yeah.
That's correct. Between 5 years between Bundesliga and the Danish Super League in Denmark. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Is does John Tolkien play for German Bundesliga?
He might be.
Do you know John Tolkien?
Yeah, when he was at the Red Bulls,
Yeah.
Yeah.
he plays for Holstein Kiel.
Oh, okay.
He's in the Bundesliga. Yeah, it's one of the teams in the Bundesliga.
So you had 35 caps with the US men's national team, is that correct?
Wow.
That's correct.
That is awesome. That's
That's crazy.
impressive. And then now you are a soccer analyst. Am I missing anything?
You're pretty much there. Yeah. The other thing that I do is I'm a co-founder and president of a soccer marketing company called For Soccer. And so we work with brands, leagues, teams, federations, confederations, rights holders, helping them to connect with soccer consumers. And then the other part of our business is in the grassroots space. So we own a couple of grassroots programs. One's called Alianza de Football, which is the largest Hispanic soccer program in the US. And then
Alianza?
Alianza, yeah.
Oh. I used to train with them.
And then Black Star, which is our black focused soccer program, which is again mostly about creating opportunities, accessibility, and awareness for the historically black communities around the U.S.
Oh my God,
Wow.
how do you have time for all of this?
Oh my God.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, we started that in late 2019, and then so I spend a mix of my time between running that business and then doing the soccer analyst stuff, which I really love. I love doing live content. So I think it's the closest thing that you get to playing the game. When you play professionally and it goes away, it's gone. It's never coming back, and so that feeling is hard to replicate. And so I found that doing the analyst work or live content is the closest thing you get to playing the game, where it's live, and it's like when you jump into the field and you make a bad pass, that can get into your mind, and you can make a lot of bad passes, or you learn to let it go. And it's the same thing with doing analyst work, where you stumble over your words, you make mistakes, and you can either let that kind of take over you and you have a bad performance, or you can get over it and keep moving on. And so I find that to be the closest comparison to playing a game in terms of that adrenaline rush.
And I'm sure it feels like you're part of the action sometimes, like making talking about the games and the plays that are happening right in front of you.
Yeah, I enjoy just staying close to the game, and obviously, being an analyst, you get to, I do mostly Western Conference games, so I do about 40 games a year with MLS on Apple TV, and so yeah, I get to be involved, and helps me stay in the know, and also like bring my kids to the stadiums from time to time, and kind of immerse them into the soccer culture.
Yeah. Do they
Wow.
play soccer?
My oldest, she's turning 9 this year. She is like off and on with soccer. My middle one is obsessed, and the youngest one just started, like, the kind of 4-year-olds, 4.5-year-old program, and she seems to love it. But young kids are just like, depends on the day and the time. But my middle one for sure loves playing and loves watching it. Like, she'll come sit down with me in the mornings when I'm home, and when a game is on, and sit down and watch it for a bit.
You played for the Red Bulls, is that correct?
I did. I did. I played for the Red Bulls from 2012 season and 2013 season.
Wait, was Aaron Long on the team at that time? Or no?
He was not. He had come after, but I know Aaron Long well. I live in here in LA, so I see him quite a bit around here. But he wasn't on the team yet. Matt Miazga was coming up into the team then. Thierry Henry was on the team back then. Dax McCarty was there. What are a couple other Red Bull?
Was Bradley Wright Phillips there?
Yeah, Bradley Wright Phillips was there. Tim Cahill was there at the time. Juninho, the Brazilian Juninho, was there for a short time as well. I was there, so it was a good era. Not in terms of, we won a Supporters Shield. We didn't win any other trophies beyond that, but there were some really good players that I got a chance to play with during that time.
Oh, for sure.
That's really cool.
You always hear about the Red Bull way. What do you think of the Red Bull system?
I like the system. I think the Red Bull system has sort of revolutionized the game or modernized or evolved the game beyond what existed. I think everybody truly want to be able to play this beautiful style of play and possession-based soccer. And Red Bull were the first to just sort of adapt a new way of looking at things that was transition soccer of no longer having luxuries on the field that it's system based and it's only as strong as that system. And so it means it's player based. So you have to have the right players that are willing to buy into that type of system and put in the work to see the rewards. What I can say is I've only had a chance to do one Red Bull game in the last couple of seasons in New York. And when I was talking to the directors and the producers of the show, they were like, hey, just so you know, we're not going to show a lot of replays because the way Red Bull plays is like the ball gets back into play and everything happens quick. And if we go to replays, sometimes there's been a goal kick and Red Bull have pressed and they've won and they've created another goal scoring chance. And so like we don't want to miss any of the game. So compared to other teams where it's a little bit more slower, methodical, that was an interesting thing to experience. It's just, how unique that is.
That is. I love hearing that. That is like very cool.
What was your biggest learning moment as a professional, and how did it shape your career?
That's a good question. I think it's probably not one individual moment. I think everything you just kind of go through your career as a series of moments. So when I was 16 and I was playing with the youth national team and living in our residency academy before they had team academies, we only had basically the IMG academy where the youth national teams lived and trained. I broke my leg at 16, and so all the interest from schools and colleges kind of disappeared on me. And I took the option that I had, which was to go to University of Portland. And then that's just an example of like what I would say like turning dead ends into detours on your career that constantly happen that you can't control, and it just how you respond to them and how you just sort of keep moving forward that I think dictates where you're going to go within your career, because we only usually see the stories once they become success stories, but there's just thousands and thousands of kids going through the same thing. And it's just all marginal, right? You're going to get a lot more no's than you get yeses. You're going to have a lot more teams. You're going to have a lot more coaches look at you and say, you're not for me. And it's not personal. One of the things that we talk about in our Alianza de Football program is that when we have a thing called Sueño Alianza, and it's a tryout program across the U.S. where we get thousands of kids every year that try out in front of scouts, and the reality is like the three of us could go for ice cream, right? And if we went for ice cream, you would order, what would be your favorite ice cream flavor?
Vanilla with hot fudge.
Vanilla without fudge. Okay, so mine would be cookies and cream, right? And so we have two different things, and that when you're looking at a player now, one coach is looking for vanilla with hot fudge and the other one's looking for Oreo cookie, right? And that is sort of the way we contextualize that for kids to know that like it's not about you. It's not that you lack skills. It's just that I'm looking for a specific type of player within my system, right? A Red Bull player is a very different type of player now than in terms of aerobic capacity, how much they're willing to run, how they understand the game versus, other types of systems. And so I know this is a super long-winded answer, but my point is that, I go back to the broken leg thing and other opportunities where I was cut from the national team and, didn't get called up to certain things, or I was sitting on the bench in the Bundesliga. Those are the little types of moments that you look back upon and you reflect on, like, did I handle it the right way? Did I like persevere in the way that I should respond to those types of things? And so I wouldn't say that there's one particular moment, but those moments come constantly, and you just have to be able to remove yourself from your emotions and just holistically build a plan on how you're going to respond to certain types of situations.
That's great.
It's a lot to take in.
That's great advice, though. We had someone on a couple weeks ago, and they just, reminded us that the journey is just like not like,
Uphill.
here to the top. That's going to be like curves and, windy roads.
Bumps in the road.
Yeah, bumps in the road.
Do you have a favorite memory or moment from your time in the league?
I've got two favorite moments. Well, one, when I played with Montreal for a year, we won the Canadian Cup, and that was a really unique experience just because when you get into Canada, you realize that there's not a lot of big cities. And so you realize how much Toronto and Montreal don't like each other, and Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto like you, with only three MLS teams, and then you have sort of the lower division teams all playing against each other. You realize the pride of a city that I hadn't really felt even playing in New York or playing in LA or playing in Dallas. So that was a unique thing. 2010 with FC Dallas, we lost in MLS Cup, but we set a number of records that year, and so that was a really big year for us, just in terms of like seeing a team. I think we had 10 points after 10 games, and um, in all honesty, nobody really liked the coach, and so the coach was in a way detrimental to our potential success. And we came together as a team, and we said, like, let's put him off to the side and let's play as a group. And we then, after 10 games, went on a run where we didn't lose until the final game of the season. We made the playoffs, made a run to the MLS Cup. We set a few records, and like those types of little things you sort of remember forever.
Yeah,
It's
we had
crazy.
someone else on, recently too, talking about, you may have times where you don't like the coach. So, like, who took the initiative? Like, one of the players to like have that conversation?
Well, it was actually myself and a guy named David Ferreira, who's Jesus Ferreira, who plays with the national team. His dad was the league MVP that year. He ended up being the league MVP that year, but him and I used to fight every day in practice because he was a playmaker and I was the defender, and I hated how lazy he was on defense, and he didn't like me talking to him that way because he was kind of our big star player, and then we all came together through the two of us sort of just being like, let's get on the same page because a playmaker is only as good as the stats that they're putting up as a playmaker. And then he went on from that point on for the rest of the year, was lights out, the best player in the league. And then we had a really solid foundation as a group of a mix of young talent and then really really confident leaders across our team. And so it required almost like by committee coming together and saying, like, we know that the training is going to suck. We know that nobody is super happy with the way this coach coaches and in the way that he does. But we're going to come together and make sure that we at least do our part. And it all kind of fell into place to the point where I want to say we went 17 games unbeaten, and there were times where we were in the 90th minute of a game and we were down a goal, and you could just feel in our team, like, doesn't matter, we're going to get a goal, we'll find a way. And that sort of belief just grew and grew and grew throughout the year until we knew that at any moment of any match we could beat anybody. And I think that's a really powerful thing that every team is looking for, but how you put those pieces together is the challenge.
So, what is your advice out of what you just said to the young players?
Yeah, I think the advice is that, like, you never want to do things out of spite, right? A coach can make a career for a player, but a coach should never break a career of a player, right? Unless you let them. And so if you find yourself in situations where you're not getting the playing time, you don't like the way a coach talks to you, you don't like the system that you're playing in, you don't like the position you're having to play, it's just about then working back from, like, what's the destination you want to be, right? If that's a starter in the team or if that's to sign a pro contract, kind of looking at the destination and working back from there to set those goals so that you can continue to have short, mid, and long-term goals to push yourself, sort of removes you from that hyper focus on today, right? And today you might not be playing. Today you might not have the best performance. You might not have a coach that you like. But the moment that you can remove yourself from that stress of delivering today and you can put it into a much bigger process, I think you give yourself a little bit more grace, and you give yourself more forgiveness, and you give yourself more time to work on things versus needing it to happen today or tomorrow or yesterday. And looking back on my career, if I could give myself that same advice, I think things could have been different when I wasn't in the team or I didn't start for a couple of games, especially when I was in Germany and I was alone and I was far from home. I would be overwhelmed, and I would just think about how missing these two games as a starter would affect me in 8 years from now on, like, making a World Cup team or playing for the team that I wanted to. And I allowed situations that I couldn't control to control me in a lot of ways. And I wish that I had had that type of advice or trust in that process to know that 1 or 2 days or 1 or 2 games or even a couple of months or even a half a year or a year setback doesn't have to define you and where you're trying to go.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that's with everything in life, right? We should set, like, always look at where we want to be in like 2 years or 5 years and 10 years, like there should always be goals.
There's a thing in golf where they say you look at the hole and you work back from the hole. So like depending on the yardage, a lot of people just hit as far as they can, and then you're between clubs on what you're capable of hitting to make it onto the green or get it into the cup. And so they say like you should work back from the end to the beginning. And I always try to remember that in like a life type of reference of like where do you want to go? Isn't You shouldn't be looking at it as you get closer to it. You should be kind of working back from that on steps to make it more realistic or holistic from an approach standpoint.
Even
I
though
agree
I'm
with that.
terrible at golf, I agree with that.
I agree with
I
that.
love that.
That
I think we're all terrible at golf. That's the beautiful thing of it.
No, this kid steps up and he's like a natural. Anyhow, we tried to like start golf lessons 2 years ago.
yeah, didn't work out.
Terrible.
Yeah, that did
He's
not work
good.
out.
What advice do you have for the young kids like looking to go pro?
Yeah, no, I would say if looking to go pro is again like I think we're at a point where you within the Red Bull Academy should have an individual development program, right? That's helping you to develop, and you should be consistently kind of looking against how are you achieving those goals versus a plan, right? That's the first step. I think um, when it comes to going pro, there's no, again, single way to get there. I think obviously academies are helping to provide exposure, but if you look at even the Red Bull Academy, right, it's vast, like thousands and thousands of kids that start within that funnel, all trying to get into the first team eventually. Um, and so it's a long journey to get there. And if you get there when you're 22 versus 16, there's no difference, right, of achieving that goal. And it can take uh, everybody a different path or a different journey. It might be through college. It might be through going to an academy somewhere else. It might be through, direct because somebody sees something in you that there's no one way that will suggest whether or not you can make it as a professional soccer player. But I would say that like going out of your comfort zone is the most important thing. I was wildly uncomfortable most of my youth, from like 13 to 18, of having to travel and be amongst people I didn't know and on fields with kids that I'd never played with. And I hated it at the time, or being pulled into an older team or moved over to a different type of team. And those types of things, looking back, are the things that help me to stay focused, to stay challenged, to stay stimulated, and constantly be testing, my comfort zones. And even as a professional player, I found myself in training sometimes being like, I'm kind of bored. And at that point, I would then work with the staff or work within my own knowledge to say, okay, I need to set like micro goals today of like, I'm not going to lose the ball for the entire training session, or I'm going to try to do this type of thing over and over again, and little things that keep you stimulated and challenged. Because if it's just about some coach having to be the one that's going to make you to the professional level, it's not going to work that way, right? You have to find little things that you challenge yourself with as well.
It's great advice.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for the parents?
Man, I got a lot of advice for parents now that I'm seeing my kids in sports and the way that a lot of parents behave. But I would say, um, you know, every parent is usually doing whatever they do for better or worse from a place of goodness, right? They're sometimes it's woven into this, living vicariously through their kids, or like I didn't make it, so I want my kid to make it, and there's that side of things. But generally, people are trying to support in a way, to give their kids the best opportunity. And so I would say for the parents is to constantly have their own sort of like checklists as to like, am I providing the resources and the parameters so that my kid could have the best opportunity to thrive? I think that's a very simple, regular question we should be asking ourselves. And then, am I providing the right cultural environment that it's allowing my child to thrive? So, am I supporting them the right way? Am I being positive? Am I pushing them the right amount? And that's all relative. And I think that's what we as parents all struggle with, is like how much is too much or how little is too little. But to really just make sure that you're harnessing a soccer culture and love for the game, because the odds of making it are really, really slim. But what we see in the US is just this massive drop off that's getting younger and younger of participants leaving the game. And they're leaving their love of the game as well. And if you look at the rest of the world, the same percentage of players participating are the same that make it to the first team, right? Very, very small level or make it professionally. But you tend to see the culture of soccer thrive elsewhere where a kid doesn't make it, but he still stays a fan of the game. And I think we have a really negative experience on our kids in the U.S. just because of the American sports culture of that pressure that they fall out of love with the game, and then it's not like, okay, well, they're just going to play for fun and they still love soccer. It's like they leave soccer completely, right? And so I think it's just about continuing to harness that love for the sport, because once that's gone, it doesn't matter how much you push them, how much talent they have, it's not going to work.
Stemming off of that, where do you see U.S. soccer going in like 5 to 10 years?
Well, I always think it's dangerous to use like windows like 5 to 10 years, because like in our soccer history, that's a huge amount of time, right? And 5 years from now versus 10 years from now, we could see complete differences. I think with the emergence of MLS academies, we're starting to reach a player development size that's like critical mass, where you need a lot of elite players to create world class players. Whereas before we'd have like one player come through and we'd all just hope that that player would be like the big star for the U.S. I think we're now reaching a level of talent that we're going to see more kids come through at a higher level that will just be pros, and then we'll see the ones that actually emerge as like potential global superstars. And so I think that development of the game is happening. I think at the pay to play level, which is the big kind of like conversation that every parent wants to talk about or people think is holding the US back. We're a very big country. It's hard to prevent or eliminate pay to play on some level. But I think that MLS academies, USL academies are going to continue to find ways to bring players in at a younger age in a more affordable way and earlier, because they see them as potential assets, right, on sustainability of their business, the ability to sell players on, things like that. And so I think in 10 years, we'll see, people talk about this golden generation right now from our U.S. men's national team, but you see they lose to Panama, which is possible. There's games that I lost with the national team that we should have won, but I don't think we're anywhere close to our golden generation. I think we're just beginning a new generation of player development that with each class, it's going to be another level of talented players that are coming through.
How can young players prepare mentally and physically for the demands of pro soccer?
I think the number one thing is be curious, right? The moment you lose that curiosity, I think you lose the mental and the physical edge. There's so much information available that you want to, when you're in practice, you should listen to your coaches. You should listen to your medical staff. You should listen to all these professionals, but also be curious, right? How, I talk about this a lot, just the evolution of sports science is that like it was very carb heavy, and then it became very protein heavy, and then it became, it's constantly shaping and shifting, and those professionals are giving their best advice. But for you, understanding your body, understanding what it needs, I used to have teammates that could party all night and not sleep and show up at training and be the best one in training. And then there was others that couldn't, and you could see the difference. Everybody kind of has their own journey, their own capabilities. I wouldn't recommend seeing if that's the right.
Yeah, let's not test that one.
But my point is that like understanding your body, understanding your mental side of the game, that makes you different, that makes you unique. Understanding the things that trigger you, really being open-minded to feedback and those types of things are going to help to build you in your career, because we all consume, we all differently, we all understand differently, we learn differently. That's why there's so much progressive education out there now. The same thing is in the developmental side of things. There's no right or wrong way. So that curiosity, I think, will allow you to take information in, question it, and then test for yourself, like, is this what's best for my body physically in terms of my nutrition? Is this what's best for my body physically in terms of what I'm doing in the gym or what I'm doing away from the training field? And this what's best for my body in terms of the mental side of the game. I think constantly kind of listening, learning, but also testing that within yourself is I think an invaluable approach to anything you do in life.
Looking back Is there anything you would have done differently in your career?
Uh, a few things, and I try not to like think too much about like what could have been because I think it's things play out the way that they're supposed to. But I had opportunities to go to bigger clubs, to go to the Premier League and things like that. But I was obsessed with like small steps to the next step of my career would eventually get me there. And then you realize how little control you have of that. And so that's from like a bucket list standpoint or checking off something that I set as a goal that didn't end up happening in the way that I wanted to. But what I would say is similar to what I answered before is uh, don't get caught up in today is the thing that I would tell myself because when I was on the bench for the national team and didn't play, or anytime that things didn't go the way that I had planned it out, I would be overwhelmed by these thinking traps of like, this today is going to affect me in a year, it's going to affect me in 2 years, or it's going to affect the fact that this club is interested in me and they want to buy me from this club. And if I'm not playing, then it's going to, and it just created a lot of extra stress that had no value in my life, and I allowed it to consume me. I allowed it to eat up a lot of my time, which ultimately would affect your performances. It affects your sleep. It affects everything you do, having that level of stress and anxiety. And sometimes it is good to be stressed, and sometimes it is good to critically think and be kind of overwhelmed so that you can, if you can learn to process, take it back and build a plan of how you plan to attack that in the future. But there was a lot of times that I just allowed something that I had zero control over just almost eat me alive. That had I had certain tools or skill sets that I have now to be able to process that or learn from that, I would have handled them much better and been able to sort of compartmentalize or put them off to the side and not allow them to affect my day to day and my ability to perform at the highest level in the environments I was in.
What impact do you hope to have on the next generation of American soccer players through your media work and insights?
Yeah, I think the impact that I would love to have is just creating more places and spaces for the youth to grow and learn through the sport, to consume, to stay in love with the game. Again, I think there was a generation where it's like we've lost so many fans because of a bad experience, and a bad experience comes from, okay, maybe you're not, when I was your age, I probably wasn't Red Bull Academy ready, right? But the alternative was like competitive and then rec, and there was nothing in between that maybe would have been able to solve for me. So then I would have exited the game with a bad experience where I'm like, there's nowhere for me to go where I'm enjoying it, right? Rec was like a waste of time. The elite level is too high for me at that point, or it's a bad coach, or it's a bad team, or it's something that's a negative experience that makes me go away. And so, my goal is to see that number of participation declines that happen at the 12 to 14 age group for boys and girls start to increase again, just through programming, through opportunities, through content, other ways to stay engaged with the game. So that would be an area that I would love to find some sort of small impact and contributing to.
Well, thank you so much for being on with us today. It was such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. This is a fun conversation.
Yeah, I wish we had longer. There's so much to talk about.
Yeah.
I'm happy to jump on again anytime, and wishing you all the best, Liam. You know, it's a fun journey that you're on, and hopefully you can continue to knock down walls in your quest to achieving whatever it is you want to achieve as a soccer player or as a person.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, hopefully we have a chance to meet you one day.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.